The sun had long since fallen out of the sky by the time Josh finished giving Kyle the scoop on Fractal's Define Nano S. Kyle gave his familiar nod of approval as he admired his friend's work, fighting the urge to flail his arms like a marionette on speed, which had long been his trademark.
Actually, he kind of nailed you there.
You know what, whatever. Where do the drives go in this thing?
They're back here.
Flushed with emotion, they stared longingly into each other's eyes.
Emotion?
Longingly? There was no longingly.
Okay, let's just try to...
Yeah, right. I mean, okay. So, what else can we stuff in this thing? No.
Kyle's Freudian slip betrayed his true emotions, his heart taking over for his mind. Choose your own adventure with the Define Nano S from Fractal Design. The case offers custom water cooling options, full-size hardware support, and top-class cable management in a compact design. Click the link in the description for more info.
What's up, guys? If you're watching this video on the day of upload, the GTX 1060 from Nvidia has just hit the market at a starting MSRP of $249 with a $50 premium for the Founders Edition. Unfortunately, these prices were announced this month in an online statement, so we couldn't really gauge Jensen's body language on stage. Assuming Nvidia has stayed true to their word on pricing, however, the GTX 960 successor puts itself in direct competition with AMD's new RX 480, which starts at $240 for the 8GB reference card and around $30 to $50 more for the custom board variants when they arrive. Essentially, both GPU manufacturers are competing for the hearts of mainstream gamers, and they're both thirstier than a girl gamer's Twitch chat, so today we'll see how these cards stack up in terms of performance and value after we take a quick look at the Green Team's new card. The Pascal-based GTX 1060 sports the GP106 GPU with 10 streaming multiprocessors and 1280 CUDA cores, a base and boost clock of 1506 and 1708 MHz respectively, a memory clock of 4006 MHz with 6 gigs of GDDR5 on a 192-bit bus, and a TDP of 120 watts. The cooler features a new but familiar polygonal design with a blower-style fan that moves hot air out the back of the chassis, and an aluminum heatsink that provides 50% more coverage than the GTX 960, which offers 25% more coverage than Obamacare. At the end of the 10-inch shroud is a single 6-pin power plug that's placed well past where the short PCB ends, indicating some fancy soldering work. Another interesting move here is the omission of an SLI finger and SLI support for this card altogether. Somehow I know Jay's still gonna find a way to water cool 4 of these things, but apart from that, I agree with Nvidia that multi-GPU setups should usually be reserved for only the highest end cards when there's no faster single card option available. At the back of the card, you'll find the standard assortment of reference display outputs for Pascal, 3 DisplayPort 1.4, 1 HDMI 2.0B, and a dual-link DVI. I'm happy to report that overclocking the GTX 1060 in MSI Afterburner was an absolute delight. Enthusiasts will rejoice that the chip has more headroom than a hoe-riding shotgun, which allowed me to dial in a 230 MHz offset without touching the voltage, bumping the max core clock to over 2.1 GHz. Throughout my testing, the card never rose above 82 degrees Celsius on my test bed using a 5820K at 4400 MHz, a Gigabyte X99 gaming G1 Wi-Fi, and 16 gigs of DDR4 at 2666 on Windows 10. And in case you're curious, here's how the card sounds. The 1060 was using the 368.64 press driver to run all games at 1920 by 1080 and 2560 by 1440. I was about to run 4K benchmarks on this card, but that was before 10-hour NyanCat guy told me it'd be a waste of time. Here's a look at all the cards tested today, which either come factory overclocked or have been tweaked manually by yours truly. On a side note, I've dialed back the MSI GTX 1070's aggressive OC mode to the gaming profile that end users can expect out of the box. With that said, let's get on to why you're really watching this video. In Firestrike Extreme, the GTX 1060 nets an overall score 3.5% higher and a graphics score 5.2% higher than the RX 480, a rather small victory. Also notice how far we've come since the GTX 960 with a 71% increase after one generation. Nice gains, Nvidia. Most companies like Apple would have just made the card thinner. GTA 5 gives us a first glimpse of real-world gaming performance, with the GTX 1060 yielding 14% more frames than the RX 480 at Full HD, and a 26% increase at 1440. The 1060 also barely manages to best the 970 at both resolutions. Clearly, the GTX 1070 and 960 are in leagues of their own at opposite ends of the spectrum. Hitman 2016 is the only title where we saw the RX 480 lead across the board, though by a smaller margin of 4 to 5%. Here, the 970 takes a big back seat, and the GTX 960 1060 is basically riding in the trunk. In Metro Last Light, the tides shift again in Nvidia's favor. At Full HD, the GTX 1060 saw 14% more frames than the RX 480 and 21% higher frame rates at Quad HD. Finally, in CRYSIS 3, there's a pretty close standoff between our three mid-range cards, but the 1060 barely takes the crown at both resolutions. From our testing, it definitely seems that the 1060 outperforms the RX 480 by a wider margin at Quad HD than it does at 1080, this time beating out Team Red by 20%. When totaling the average frame rates, we find the GTX 1060 to be 25% slower than its GP104 broski, 8.5% faster than the GTX 970, 9.5% faster than the RX 480, and it outright poops on the chest of our GTX 960. Now clearly compared to the RX 480, the 1060 is the faster chip overall, but can it dethrone the Polaris card as the current value king? For our frames per dollar test, I used the current lowest pricing that I could find between Amazon and Newegg for all of our cards, with the exception of the 1060, which we're basing off of the official MSRP. As we can see here, the RX 480 remains the best bang for the buck option with 1.9 frames per dollar compared to 1.7 FPD with the GTX 1060. If Nvidia hopes to pluck this title from AMD's hand, we'll have to see a custom GTX 1060 that's just as fast retail for no more than $262 to achieve an FPD higher than the RX 480. Should this be the case, I sincerely hope it doesn't push the 480 over the edge. Every card has its limit after all. So in the end, which card is right for you? Well, if you want to make the most informed decision, I would wait to see what the custom board pricing looks like from both GPUs once they hit the shelves. But from what we know now, the GTX 1060 is a very fast card for the price, and often scores notably higher frame rates than the RX 480, especially at Quad HD as I mentioned earlier. While I didn't have time to test it, this also leads me to believe that the 1060 would have a bit more longevity when it comes to VR. If you got that baby daddy money, the GTX 1060 gets my full recommendation. That being said, I wouldn't call the 1060 an RX 480 killer. AMD's new card is still a compelling choice for 1080 gaming and entry-level VR, whose value may still have some greater appeal for those on slimmer budgets. But that's gonna do it for now, guys, so let me know what you think of this card in the comments, and don't forget to toss me a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Before you go, check the description for the bestest t-shirts in all the webs, and notice my Amazon affiliate link down there. All I'm saying is notice it. As always, I'm Kyle with Awesome Sauce Network. For now, thank you guys for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see y'all in the next video.